Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to WatchBox. We are waking up with watches. Everything you see here is for sale. Reach out to me, Tim Mosso, at thewatchbox.com for pricing details. Because every single watch, for the first time on today's show, for the first time ever, every single watch is not offered on the website. These are exclusives that you will only see here on Wake Up with Watches, and they represent the best we've got. Let's roll straight in, starting with Breitling and the SuperOcean Heritage 57-2. This one was the one released last year for COVID relief. 42 millimeters in stainless steel by just over 10 millimeters thick. This is inspired by the 1957 SuperOcean Reference 1004, the first ever Breitling dive watch. Now, the timepiece has an extravagant blue sunburst rainbow index dial. You can see that the bezel is beautifully concave with a ceramic insert. It is a classical diving bezel rather than a modern ISO, so it is bidirectional rotating. You have a Stabe full mesh bracelet. This is Breitling factory fitment. Note how they've conformed the end of the Stabe bracelet to the flank of the case. Lovely, graceful, minimalist case lines, 100 meters water resistant, and a COSC chronometer. Also, a limited edition of 1,000 pieces, with the proceeds going to COVID relief. Pop open the clasp, throw it on the wrist. This wears about as well as any dive watch you'll ever encounter. It is flat, it is thin, it's relatively narrow across the wrist, meaning any wrist can wear it well. Superbly comfortable, outrageously attractive, and with 1,000 pieces made, sold out immediately, rare. This is a watch we are not offering on our website. You're only going to see it here, so reach out to Tim Mosso at thewatchbox.com for all of your purchase and pricing questions. This might be my favorite watch on the entire show, and I'm just getting warmed up. Okay, jumping to a very different type of sports watch. We're going from Grenchen to Geneva and the FP Journe Elegant 48 Titanite. Launched 3 years ago, it features a 48 millimeter grade 5 titanium case with the Titanite surfacing, which is over 1,200 Vickers and super hardened against scratches and scuffs. Now, this watch is 48 millimeters lug to lug, not wide. It's about 38.5 millimeters wide and only 7.7 millimeters thick. You can see that it is the first quartz men's watch from FP Journe, as we have a quartz movement of Journe's own design, and you can see it even incorporates hand finishing and rose gold. That's caliber 1210. It has a standby power reserve potential of 18 years. On the wrist, it will last 8 to 10 years battery life, and that's because there is a standby system. When you let the watch sit for 30 minutes or more, it deactivates the stepper motors for the hands, but the microprocessor remembers the time. When you pick it up, this little eccentric mass or oscillating weight on the dial side changes its position, and as it does so, it wakes up the motors, and the hands will move clockwise or counterclockwise, whichever is shorter, to reach the current correct time. With the screw-down crown, the watch is tested to over 50 meters at the factory, so while the rating is 30 meters, the test is over 50, and Journe's engineers have actually confirmed with me that this is the only swimmable FP Journe watch, recommended as such from the factory. Let's do a quick loom shot, because this one is like none other. You can see the dial is a backlit full disc of luminova, and you can see the indices, the printing, the numerals, everything visible sort of in relief against the backdrop of the dial base. It also features hacking seconds for precise setting, and once again, one of the few quartz watches you will ever encounter that has a worthwhile display case back. And like I said, I am just getting started. Let's up the ante one more time. This is a recent returnee. As you can see, new for 2020, 43 millimeters in grade 5 titanium. This is the Greubel Forsey Balancier S, an 18-piece limited edition. It's titanium outside, and then it's titanium, both bridges and plates, on the inside, and you can see that the titanium has been blued. Not only blued, but look at the attention to detail. Greubel Forsey finish is no compromise. All screw heads, black polished on their tops, chamfered slots and circumference. You can see golden chaton containing the individual pivot jewels. You can see that there's a raised and relieved plinth along the edge of these bridges. You can see it's been black polished on the titanium base, and then they're filled with that lovely matte blue. Now, the watch does include a spectacular dial that is loomed, by the way, so it's a sports watch, and a true sports watch. integrated rubber strap, vulcanized rubber, 100 meters water resistant, and a 3-day power reserve with loomed hour and minute hands. You can see how the hands have been rolled so they'll fit underneath the cambered sapphire that's used, and you can see that the case has a sort of tonneau-like camber or arc from side to side, and the sapphire is impressively shaped. The watch features an oversized 13+ millimeter balance, and you can see that it is free sprung, adjusted in 6 positions, and it has an overcoil hairspring, so regardless of what orientation you place the watch on your desktop at night or your wrist, it's going to beat concentrically, the hairspring that is, and the watch is going to keep even time regardless of position. So not just an extraordinary feat of chronometry, but beautifully made. Black polish, mirrored anglage, sharp interior angles, exemplary 100 Swiss franc screws, and as you can see, a combination of satin, media blasting, and polish, all together in a watch that is distinctively Greubel Forsey, right down to its double deployant twin trigger clasp. The timepiece wears easily. Let's do a quick wrist shot here. On my wrist, 16 centimeters in circumference. You can see it's not huge. Across the wrist, it's under 48 millimeters, which means, and you can see this well from overhead, it's narrow across the wrist, as a lot of that span of the case is actually the strap itself. Integrated, handsome, and probably one of Robert Grubel's best recent designs. He's the aesthetic sensibility behind the brand. Stephen Forsey, the engineer and principal watchmaker. But this watch is a wonderful fusion of their visions. Let's throw the Journe Elegant 48 on the wrist real quick, because I feel like I didn't give that one any wrist time. Taking a quick look, you can see it's almost as narrow across the wrist as the Greubel Forsey. It is much thinner in profile, and this is one that you could really wear as your dress watch if you so wish. This is a quick release strap, so you can see how it has pull tabs on its underside. So these pull tabs allow you to remove the strap without tools. So if you want to swap the look here to something a little bit more subdued, it is easy to do so. Okay, continuing on our sports watch kick, we're going to Schaffhausen, and the other manufacturer of Schaffhausen, IWC is the first, the second is H. Moser Cie. But whereas IWC is making over 100,000 watches these days, H. Moser Cie makes only about 1,500, as they like to say, very rare, and it holds up. 42.8 millimeters in stainless steel, 120 meters water resistant, 3-day automatic winding, and fully loomed. This is the H. Moser Cie Pioneer Tourbillon. It features a midnight blue fume dial. That fume style is distinctive of Moser. It starts light at the center and then darkens as it reaches the edge. You can see this is a flying tourbillon. There is no upper bridge to obscure the mechanism. And whereas you saw one overcoil hairspring on the Greubel Forsey, here we have 2. And you can see that there's a stud holder on each side. They are 180 degrees removed from each other. The idea being, since the hairspring generally will beat faster or slower in certain orientations with respect to gravity, create 2 identical hairsprings and then pull them out of phase 180 degrees opposed, so when one tends to run slow because of gravitational influence, the other, because it is perfectly opposite in orientation, will run fast, so they cancel each other out, restoring the historic purpose of the tourbillon from the pocket watch era, which is chronometry. So this watch captures the intrigue and beauty of the tourbillon, yes, but also the notion of keeping good time. Now you can see that the tourbillon carriage here has outstanding depth. We have 2 overcoil hairsprings here. You can see the escapement easy to appreciate from the top, and then there's lovely hand finishing about the tourbillon carriage itself. Turning it all over, you can see that the watch includes a lovely movement, 3-day power reserve, automatic winding, and it is robust. It is a magic lever style winding system, which means that it is a bidirectional winder, so it has no unidirectional wobble like a 7750. Also, it is quite shock tolerant, and while the watch itself is not terribly thin, you can see that it is fitting underneath my cuff, so if you did want to wear this one with a jacket, you'd have no problem whatsoever. And because it's rare to see a fully loomed tourbillon watch, let us take a quick look in the dark. And for that matter, I'll bring Greubel Forsey into the discussion. Here's the Grubel. I promised you a loomed high horology sports watch, and sure enough, there it is. And here is the Moser. The Moser, I should mention, with this midnight blue dial and the tourbillon in the Pioneer case, a 50-piece limited edition in stainless steel. So this is not a common watch. Even by Moser standards, 50 pieces is exceptional. And I remind you that none of these watches are available on our website. Now we're going to stick with Moser, but now we're starting to lean towards dress watches. This right here is the extravagant and extraordinary Endeavor Center Second, and this one with a lovely funky blue fume dial is distinctly brighter than the midnight blue of the Pioneer, and you can really see the contrast right here. Funky blue is the color probably most often associated with Moser watches. Now you can see here, it is also a limited edition. This one in white gold, 100 pieces. It also has an automatic winding 3-day power reserve, as both of these watches feature the same magic lever base winding system and base caliber. But what you get here is considerably more refined. As you can see, the case is beautifully sculpted. Not that the Pioneer isn't beautiful, but it's more rugged, chiseled, cut, and industrial, whereas the case of the Endeavor is fluid, sensuous, sinuous, and graceful. You can see these lovely mirror-polished hollows, concave profiles on the case band. You can see the concave bezel designed to pair the apparent mass, though it's not a massive case at less than 11 millimeters thick and 40 millimeters in diameter. The movement is a gorgeous in-house job, and what I love about Moser is they don't just build movements, they build the small parts of movements. So they build the escapement, they build the hairspring, they build the balance wheel. All of this, as you can see, is subject to hacking seconds, so you do have the ability to synchronize the watch to the nearest second. You'll note the array of finishes. There's a double stripe Côte de Genève across the bridges. There is engine turning on the base plate. The screw heads on this watch are polished rather than blued. And then you'll note on the rotor itself a combination of satination as well as media blasting in the recesses. So this is a thoughtfully and handsomely finished watch that comes with a white gold pin buckle. Let's go back to the Pioneer for a second. You can see this one features a full deployant clasp, which is becoming of a sports watch, makes it tougher to accidentally drop the watch when you are in a marine environment. Here, this one's going to be high and dry. You're not going to be swimming with this watch, so you don't necessarily need the clasp as urgently. Throw it on the wrist, and you can see it will easily fit underneath the cuff. It is a very compact case. It's less than 47 millimeters from lug to lug, which means it wears really nicely on a smaller wrist. Being low cut and low slung, it's a fantastic dress watch, but being a white metal with a cheerful bright dial, it's also sports casual enough that you could wear it with just about anything short of a true bathing suit in the pool. You have the Pioneer tourbillon for that. And as a matter of fact, let's up the ante. You have the Pioneer Center Second. Now here we have another take on the Moser Fume dial, and you can see that this is the Pioneer Center Second Black. This is the watch from the Pioneer Tour. If you remember the circumnavigation through enthusiast hands of the Moser sports watch over the last 2 years, it was this model right here. Now it has an explosive blue fume fade from the center to the edge, and as you can see, unlike the Pioneer tourbillon, here we have blackened indices, though the hands themselves provide a higher level of contrast. They are blackened, though not quite to the same degree as the indices themselves. The watch is easy to read, minimalist, and with a no-date dial, perfectly balanced. Flipping it over, you can see once again the same base here. All of these watches that you've seen so far from Moser feature automatic winding 3-day bases. And of course you have the hacking seconds here as well. A very tough architecture. You'll note in each case the balance is on a full bridge anchored on both sides with a free sprung index, so the adjustment can be very precise thanks to the free sprung balance, and then it can hold that adjustment in the face of concussions on the wrist. Now the strap is vulcanized rubber, perforated, and ideally suited to a sports watch application. We saw the Pioneer tourbillon featured those sculpted sides with coined interiors, and you can really see within the recesses of the case flank you do have that coining that gives it texture and definition. Moser, unlike most brands, does not stamp its cases. It machines its cases and then hand finishes, and that's how these elaborate interior contours on its cases are made possible. First you machine, then you finish by hand. That's how you get this level of depth. Throw it on the wrist. It's a large watch, it's a stark watch, but it is a comfortable watch. As broad as it is, I find I can still wear it well, and part of that is due to the shape of the case. As you can see from overhead, it's not eating my wrist alive, and as you can see from the end, it has a tapered flare and bend from lug to lug. So across the case, it's got a little bit of a banana-like camber, so it wraps around the edge of your wrist. You can also see the attention to detail, which is superb. Though the watch is all black, it is not monotonous. It has a combination of satin toning on the lug hoods, and then you can see there's polish on the case band with a little bit more of a sort of a striated polish inside the coined case blank. So you have this combination of satin and polish that plays up dramatically in the light. Now you saw one big black boutique independent horology piece. Now we see another. Launched in 2008, this is the Urwerk UR-202. But what sets this watch apart from almost everything else going, and I apologize for my fingerprints here, is the way Urwerk does black watches. They do something that is exceedingly rare in the industry. Black platinum. They've been doing it on flagship pieces in limited runs since their foundation in 1997. And this UR-202 features the revolving satellite display, a moon phase, a power reserve indicator, automatic winding, a 43mm by 45.5mm black platinum case, and it also features a little bit of titanium cladding on the bottom. Now this thing uses a turbine winding mechanism that you can set to either free rotation and maximum winding vigor and efficiency. You can put it in an intermediate position, which uses air pressure as the turbines are functional and they force air through the apertures that you can see on the reverse side. But by partially closing off those air apertures, you slow down the air being pumped by the turbines. Now there is a Zenith Elite movement in here, as Urwerk has always used. And that Zenith Elite, being an automatic winder, is actually geared by means of the winding rotor to the turbines. The turbines are governed by the flow of air pressure, and the function selector governs how much air can be pumped by the turbines. So you have a pneumatic braking system for the winding mechanism of the Zenith Elite base, and that allows you to completely lock the winding system for intense activity. Most folks like me who are desk divers, who work in an office, are going to want full winding efficiency. And then there are going to be those who have more of an eclectic routine, and they're perhaps going to place the index in the middle for intermediate winding efficiency. This is a special edition, exceptionally low volume watch. And as you can see, it is the classic Urwerk satellite system. It is inspired by the wandering hours clocks of the late Renaissance, and more recently the Audemars Piguet star wheel of the early 90s, but you can see how Urwerk does it differently. Now, the current numeral on the scale at the bottom, it indicates the minutes. So you can see 8, and then this is 8:45. But as it rolls off the end of the scale, you can see that the succeeding numeral takes over. So there you go, you see 9:30. Keep watching, watch under my finger. You can see that the system isn't just a star wheel. The actual mechanism features a rolling numeral index on each wing of the star wheel display. So you can see how these roll into position before they roll onto the scale. The watch has an automatic winding, 50-hour power reserve, and as you can see, the interior of the watch is extraordinarily three-dimensional. There's even some engine turning and some lovely blackened accents, along with a very bright scale. And it becomes more so by night. As you can see, the system, I'm going to do my best to operate, the system features a fully luminescent scale, fully luminescent satellites, and as you can see, there's fully luminescent power reserve on the right of the screen, and there's a fully luminescent moon phase on the left side of the screen. It is truly a horological event, beguiling, engrossing, and hypnotic. You will find yourself playing with this watch as much as you spend time reading the time. You're probably going to have to be resetting it because that satellite is just too much fun. From Urwerk, remember, Felix Baumgartner of Urwerk is a member of the AHCI, which is the Watchmakers Cool Kids Club, alongside F.P. Journe, Philippe Dufour, Carrie Voudelainen, Beat Haldeman, and Vianney Halter. So he is their equal, and he is a member of their society. But Martin Fry, who designs these, gives you extra value, as Urwerk, one of the original independents back in 1997, is the fusion of Fry's industrial design vision with Baumgartner's watchmaking. They build the mechanisms on top of generally base movements, and Zenith is used here, and that's about as good as you can get. Martin Fry's design, Felix Baumgartner's satellite display system, and Zenith's base movement. Let's throw it on the wrist. It's not as big as you think it's going to be. Though all black platinum, it is considerably heavier than you'd expect. Let me pull my sleeve back so you can just see my wrist here. This is a truly special watch. Now you can see it doesn't wear huge because the pivot points are actually recessed from the ends of the cases. So throw it on the wrist, and you can see that although it's a big watch, it's really not that broad. Look how narrow the pivot points are. The pivot points are well inboard of the edge of my wrist. It's an easy watch to read, and it could even be interpreted as a driver's watch, since it's very easy to read the time when your hand is at that particular angle on the wheel. A timepiece that has extraordinary clarity. It's not just extraordinarily clear, but it's intuitive. And I find that once you get used to this display system with its digital display methodology, it becomes easier and quicker to read than a conventional 2 or 3 hand round watch. These two are probably my favorites on the show today, and you can see they are disparate in style, price, size, and function, but I love them both because they are absolutely unrestrained expressions of joy in horological form. There's an elan about these pieces that echoes what it is we feel. It resonates in our hearts. It's what we love about watches distilled to the minimum, and these watches represent that equally well from different ends of the price spectrum. Okay, now we have 2 in rose gold. Let's start with FP Journe. This is the Vagabondage 3. The V3, launched in late 2017, made in 69 examples in platinum and actually 68 in rose gold. So this rose gold model, one of 68 made, is more exclusive than the platinum. The watch is 8 millimeters thick by 45 millimeters lug to lug by about 38 millimeters wide, and it features an extraordinary jumping seconds digital time display. There is also a jump hour, a power reserve, and scrolling minutes. The dial, as has always been the case with the Vagabondage series since the mid-2000s, it does not feature the name of the maker, though rest assured he did invent and make it, and he says so on the case back. FP Journe, properly sized movement made of rose gold. The movement made of rose gold means that this watch, though not large, is gold inside and gold outside. It's hefty and impressive. It comes with a full deployant clasp, which is a rare accessory on a Journe watch, and then you can see there's a smoked sapphire over the dial that allows you to rather easily see the underlying mechanism. I should also mention that it uses a remontoire d'égalité or constant force device, so for the first roughly 28 hours of its power reserve, it doesn't just jump the display for the seconds, it also maintains constant balance amplitude, just like the chronometer optimum and the tourbillon. So this is an extraordinary little watch, not just for how it appears, which is extraordinary and animated, but also for how it fits and how well it keeps time. The original Vagabondage 1 used a movement that Journe had originally designed for a Cartier Tour 2 jump hour, and while he was pleased with the aesthetic of the system, he didn't actually consider it to be an example of chronometry up to his standards, so he didn't put his name on the original Vagabondage 1. By the 2 and certainly by the 3 with this remontoire system, the watch had achieved both his original intent of an animated dial and high-level chronometry and high performance as a timekeeper. This watch has it all. And again, none of the watches you have seen today or will see today are listed on our website. This 44 millimeters in red gold is proof that de Bethune does not just make spaceship-styled cases with Star Trek badging on the dials. This is a watch, frankly, that has space-age technology, but doesn't look like it would be worn by an officer in Starfleet Command. It's the DB25 Power Reserve, 44 millimeters in red gold. You can see it features handsome, gossamer, graceful, but conventional and fixed lugs. No floating lugs here. It's also a thin watch with a conventional round case. It also has, well, I'm not going to say a conventional guilloche dial, because these days most guilloche is stamped. This is real rose lathe cut guilloche, and de Bethune has the equipment to make its own cases, its own dials, and its own movements, and all 3 are built in-house from this company in Lauberson, Switzerland, that makes 150 watches a year under watchmaker Denis Flageolet and CEO Pierre Jacques. They have only built about 2,800 watches since 2002 when they were first founded. Everything is done in-house. You can see that the printing on the dial is blue rather than black, a lovely and lush detail. Note that the hands at center are both black polished and fired blue. There's a power reserve indicator for the 6-day power reserve here, and you can see the depth of the dial with a toroidal hour track that's placed on top of the center dial outboard. A gorgeous detail. Roll it over, and as you can see, the movement is extraordinary. It's the caliber 2024, and it features a shock-protected winding system for the twin barrel movement, and the shock protection system here is patented. There's a platinum mass outboard. The rotor itself is titanium, and fired blue titanium at that. You can see these little jeweled cantilevers. They act as the shock protection system for the rotor. Twin self-adjusting mainspring barrels, those provide the 6 days of power reserve, and they have sapphire inside their barrel walls, which means that the springs are subject to far less internal friction within the barrels. Now you have triple parachute shock protection system. Shock protection for the rotor, shock protection for the balance. This has two purposes. One, durability. Two, chronometry. The faster these springs can recenter the balance staff, the faster the watch can return to conventional operation and proper timekeeping after a shock. So you have 1, 2, 3 shock protection springs. Note the balance. It is non-annular. It is a combination of platinum masses and a yoke or crucifix-like shape that features a titanium center and then the platinum masses outboard. Again, it's very much like a steering yoke on a vintage aircraft. It is very little like a modern annular or circular balance. There's a flat hairspring that's 2 pieces clamped together. Those 2 pieces of the hairspring are manually shaped, then clamped together to create the concentric beating that you get in an overcoil hairspring. Remember, we talked about overcoil hairsprings and how they help to center the mass. Well, 2 overcoils is ideal. The problem is whether 1 or 2 overcoils, they're thick and they're subject to shock and vulnerable. This flat system beats concentrically like an overcoil, but it doesn't add thickness and it doesn't add shock susceptibility. Everything about this de Bethune made in-house. And though 44 millimeters is large, don't be deceived. It wears well on my small wrist. You can see my wrist, 16 centimeters circumference. Note how flat the watch is and how easily it fits underneath the cuff. If you want a watch that incorporates no fewer than 6 individual patents and traditional high horology finish and craft, such as guilloche, welded lug case construction, and component finishing internally, this watch gives you all of that and then some. And again, with 150 made each year over several model lines and subvariants, exclusivity is assured with de Bethune. It is where I would spend my money were I buying a watch today. Now we're jumping back to Moser, and I've got a tag team of 2 extraordinarily colorful models. Let us start with the Venturer XL Purity Cosmic Green dial. As you can see, the case itself here, along with the clasp, is stainless steel. So you get a watch that is 43.1 millimeters in diameter, still nice and thin. It has that classic sculpted Moser case profile, and you can see that to good effect, including vertical satination and the mirrored hollows, a domed sapphire over a fumé fade dial, and this is what Moser calls the Purity dial. It's not quite as spare as the Concept. Remember, this is the Concept. The Concept is absolutely unadorned. Purity gives you a few reference points to more easily judge the time. So you have the indices at the quarters. Now the watch has that lovely fade from green to almost black at the edge, all in steel, 43.1 millimeters. It wears well. It's not a thick watch, though it is a substantial watch. It has a bit of a sporty character for a dress watch, and I guess I would classify it as a dress watch. It's not highly water resistant. It's not loomed. It is a dress timepiece, but it's not a stodgy dress timepiece. It's a dress watch for a younger man or a raffish and irreverent older man. This is a timepiece that I would wear myself, especially with the combination of this kudu leather strap. Kudu, minimally tanned here, showing a lot of the imperfections of the original animal hide. This is a signature strap material for Moser, but make no mistake, we're still talking a brand new Moser factory strap, and you can see that on the underside to good effect. This only looks weathered. That's the style. It is a new strap. The same is true on this Venturer XL Concept, and this is the Arctic Blue dial. Arctic Blue is lighter than Funky Blue. Funky Blue, in turn, is lighter than Midnight Blue. And you can see all this, but it's dramatic when you place Midnight Blue alongside Arctic Blue. You can see even the edge of the Arctic Blue fade, and this here is a Concept dial, and you can really see the difference between Purity here. So technically this is the Venturer XL Concept Arctic Blue, and this here is Purity. Purity still has a few marks and reference points. Concept is absolutely unadorned. 3 hands, a sunken register for small seconds, and in case you're wondering, yes, it does feature a hacking or stop seconds mechanism. Turn it all over, and you can see, and this is actually true for both of these watches, they feature identical movements, And they feature, in both instances, case-back power reserve indicators. So let me show you what that's about. The case-back power reserve indicator traces 3 days of manual wind power reserve. So while the watch is completely unadorned and bare on the front, it is actually a complication, as there's a power reserve indicator. Adjacent to that, you can see a free-sprung balance with an overcoil hairspring, and that overcoil, also made by Moser through Precision Engineering, their subsidiary. They actually make their own hairsprings, balances, escapements, and they produce hairsprings for, among others, MB&F, which is why you'll often see them credited as one of Max's friends on the extended credit list for MB&F machines and performance art devices. So you have this nice stately 18,000 vibration per hour beat rate, and again, that's also true over here on the Purity. It's a 3-day reserve, it's an overcoil, it's free sprung, it's a full balance bridge. It is both tough and fine, well regulated, and very precise. This one, as you can see in red gold, is part of 100. So as a limited edition, you get an additional level of exclusivity on top of the fact that there simply aren't many Mosers made each year. I actually prefer this one to the Purity dial in cosmic green. While green is generally my color, this Arctic blue absolutely inspires me. It's vivid, it's electrifying. It's almost like the blue on the old iridescent Omega Seamasters of the late 90s and early 2000s. Also, it's got more than a passing resemblance to Rolex's legendary Z Blue dial on the current Milgauss. I really like this, and with the red gold, and it is red, not pink, not rose, it is a very handsome and striking watch. Once again, one that is low enough to fit underneath the cuff, and probably sized so you can still wear it on a wrist as small as 14 centimeters circumference. On both of these watches, you're getting simple pin buckles, so there's no distinguishing them other than by the material made. They are both equally easy to fit to the wrist. Let us bring some more hardware on. Let's go back to Geneva. Let's go back to Journe. We haven't really featured one of the conventional Journe sports watches. We featured the Elegant 48, and this would be my choice among Journe sports watches, but there are some who prefer mechanical movement. And for them, there is the 44mm full titanium integrated bracelet Line Sport Centigraphe Sport. Remember, the original Centigraphe back from 2007, with the same movement you'll find in here, at least technically speaking, it won the Aiguille d'Or at the GPHG, which of course is the grand prize at the Oscars of watchmaking. Now larger as a 44mm with the integrated bracelet of the Line Sport collection and a vivid yellow lacquer dial. This is a watch super light, super thin, broad, flat, and comfortable that absolutely disappears on the wrist. Now, it's easy to read by day or night because it's fully loomed, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a moment, but it's also under 11mm thick, which means it sits really low on the wrist. Now, there are two ways this watch has been made. One with rubber bumpers, the other without. I prefer rubber bumpers. Why? Because they work. If you hate disfigured finish, you're going to love these bumpers. Journe is a practical man. Yes, design and engineering can be a little bit whimsical by nature in the luxury watch space, but he added these bumpers on the original Line Sport Centigraphe back in 2011 because they protect the finish. They also provide a tonal contrast. If you ask me, I like that. And of course, it's not just the case, it's not just the individual links, it's also the underside of the clasp. Now, rolling over to the case band, you can see that there's a nice bevel that runs circumferentially around the case, and this is not the conventional Centigraphe case. It is an integrated one with a tapered bracelet. You can see that the individual numerals are applique, they're three-dimensional, so they're blocks of luminova placed on the dial. Because it is the Centigraphe, 1/100th of a second, you have a 360,000 vibration per hour second escapement. You have a 1/100th of a second foudroyant, so it's a 1-second dial, a 20-second dial, and a 10-minute dial. And because it dispenses with the somewhat frivolous tachymeters of the standard Centigraphe, it opens the dials up and allows a smoked sapphire to be able to be placed over the center. And the one over the foudroyant has been opened up compared to the 20-second and the 10-minute, and it's been opened up so you can see that revolutionary second escapement. Now, two patents here, one for the rocker system that allows you to stop and start. Though it looks like a mono pusher, it actually works like a twin pusher in that you can stop it and start it. And when you turn it over, I'll turn it over in just a second here, but when you turn it over, you can see that the movement itself is made of aluminum. The original Centigraphe Sport from 2011 was an aluminum watch with an aluminum movement. Later on, the aluminum cases were scrapped because they were challenging to make consistently, and Journe went to a titanium exterior. But what Journe never did away with was the original aluminum movement inside the watch. The second patent applied for and received on the Centigraphe is that barrel that you saw at the center of the movement. And the barrel takes pride of place because the arbor of the barrel, or the axle, runs the chronograph components, whereas the toothed edge of the barrel, and you can see that here, the toothed edge of the barrel drives the time. So by driving one part of the watch, the complication, off the arbor, and the time off of the edge of the barrel, you can activate the chronograph without losing balance amplitude. So unlike almost every other chronograph, which loses 30 to 50 degrees of amplitude when you start the chrono, this loses none. The trick, well, the trick is that patented mechanism. The watch has an 80-hour power reserve if you wind it manually to its fullest extent and don't run the chronograph. It has a 24-hour power reserve if you run the chronograph continuously. But given that the largest sub-register on the watch is 10 minutes, there is no need to run it for 24 hours straight. This watch is awesome. Let's do a loom shot. Okay, we're back with the Line Sport Centigraphe Sport. As you can see, those blocks of loom on the dial really do have a glorious three-dimensional character. You can see how they rise above the dial base. This is a true sports watch, feather light, nicely buffered by rubber bumpers for durability, and fully loomed. Okay, we're bringing back a favorite from recent episodes. Two examples, both with Granfo enamel dials, both fusée and chain, both 43 millimeters, from Romain Gauthier, the standard in Valet de Joux finish. And I'm going to say they are the standard. As Philippe Dufour is finishing up his final editions of the Simplicity, I think the future belongs to Romain Gauthier. Now, in terms of Philippe Dufour comparisons, I don't make them lightly. Dufour does great work. Gauthier does great work. I think they're about equal in total quality. But again, the difference is that Gauthier is just beginning his career in the watch industry. He's an engineer by trade, which is why the logical one, whether in titanium or white gold, breaks with previous conventions. Let me show you this example right here. This is from the Heritage Collection. Romain Gauthier, of course, an engineer first, a businessman second, and a watch designer more recently. He has watchmakers who build these watches. He envisions new ways of engineering a watch. So let's start with the fusée and chain. You can see it to good effect. How do you wind it? Well, you wind it with a button adjacent to the fusée and barrel assembly. How does it work? Not with a fusée and chain, but with a snail cam and chain. As you wind the watch, the chain, which has innumerable small roller rubies inside its black polished expanse, but that chain wraps around the snail cam, so it always stays in the same plane as the wheel by which the barrel draws the chain. So a conventional fusée stacks up like a spiral, whereas this always keeps the chain in the same plane as the wheel that is drawing it, and that better maintains constant force to the escapement. The escapement, which features a free-sprung balance at the end of a drivetrain composed of Romain Gauthier's signature circle-within-circle wheels. Gauthier also provides engineering and wheel production for Chanel watches, as Chanel does have a stake in Romain Gauthier, the company. Now you can see on top of this immaculately finished free-sprung balance, there is a Granfo enamel dial in black. That is true fired enamel, fired up to 20 times at 800 degrees centigrade. You set the watch using the small crown up at 2 o'clock. The hands, which are black polished and white gold, are also skeletonized. And you can see that the timepiece features a lovely gilt base plate combination, both satin finish and media blasting with a polished ridge between them. Now let's take a look at interior angles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That's just on the fusée and chain. We also have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and that's just on the front of the watch. Turn it all over. Now you have a power reserve indicator, but you also have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. I'm not even done. We're up to 15 interior angles where two bevels meet in a sharp crease, one of the most difficult finishing assignments for an artisan in the business, and this watch has literally dozens on its front and reverse side. There's satin finishing across the structures that bear the power reserve indicator, as well as adjacent mechanisms, and then you can see that the barrel is open, which acts as a sort of informal power reserve indicator. 43 millimeters in diameter. The watch is substantial, but it's also graceful. Gauthier has no dogmas about how a watch should look, so in addition to the unusual snail cam fusée, He has these lovely machined and hand-finished case flanks. As you can see, the lugs are beautifully evacuated and then media blasted internally with high polish outside and the warmth that comes with white gold. Taking a look on the wrist, you can see it's large, but it's not huge. It's a remarkable statement of innovation. Again, Gauthier is first a businessman and an engineer, and only last a watch designer. So his watch, as a result, incorporates blue sky thinking that no one else in the business, including the great Mr. Dufour, has ever considered previously. Now, the fusee and chain system maintains constant amplitude about the balance for 46 hours. It is a 46-hour power reserve. The constant force system, of course, drives the balance, and it is free sprung for durability. So once regulated, and you can see the variable inertia bolts on the balance itself, it can take bumps, concussions, and disruptions with no change to the mechanism's timing. You can see here we have a lovely frosted blue Grand Faux enamel dial. This too is Grand Faux enamel, and perhaps even more impressive than the white gold case, the grade 5 titanium, which is lighter than steel and more scratch resistant. Here it has satin on the bezel, satin on the lug hoods, bright polish on the sides, and frosting within the recesses of the lugs. Turn it all over. Once again, you have the same fundamental architecture, but in a more techno-industrial sort of grayscale aesthetic. This one's a little bit more austere, but no less beautifully finished in detail. It's also a little bit more contemporary. As a titanium watch, it wears considerably lighter and with more subdued tones compared to the lovely and warm Heritage Collection model. You can see this one from the Freedom Collection. Really very comfortable, very light, not excessively broad across the wrist. It's full-sized rather than oversized. Those are very special watches. And we're going to finish up with a bombshell from Moser. This watch, again, none of the watches you've seen here are offered on our website. So reach out to Tim Mosso at thewatchbox.com. This is the email question line for anything you see on this show. Reach out directly to me because my team and I, we have all of the answers, including about this spectacular 42mm Endeavor Flying Tourbillon Venta Black. Now, it is a flying tourbillon, it is a Venta Black dial, it is a concept dial, and it is in white gold. It is also a rare watch. This is a limited edition of 50 pieces. Taking a look at the dial, we've seen the tourbillon on the Pioneer, and mechanically they're identical. Flying tourbillon, double overcoiled hairspring, 3-day power reserve, automatic winding. What's different about them is the dial, and the dial here has miles of style. It's difficult to express because Venta Black is a directional carbon nanotube material. The nanotubes are vertically oriented, and it absorbs 99.965% of light. The only reflections you're seeing here are on the sapphire. The dial itself is like a singularity, a black hole, a bottomless pit, and the tourbillon is made even more prominent as a result of its contrast with the dial. But you'll also note the attention to detail as the tourbillon carriage here has been DLC blackened, a sort of simpatico arrangement that nicely echoes the dial itself. And of course here we have that glorious Endeavor case, the same sculpting we saw on the earlier models we have right here, and again the same rugged bidirectional rotating architecture. You'll note that to properly brace and support the tourbillon, because it's a flying tourbillon, there's no upper bridge, that ceramic ball bearings are actually used on the underside to support the tourbillon structure. And in an upgrade from the standard HMC 200 movements, this is the HMC 804, you can see that there is a lovely and evocative pivot jewel for the barrel. The barrel arbor is set in a golden chaton fixed by screws, a nod to the 19th century era of Moser pocket watches. And then we have a full deploying clasp. Remember, that is a rarity. Most Moser watches, even limited editions, even in precious metal, generally only include pin buckles. So this is a watch at 42mm that is special in every regard except dimension. It is not an extraordinarily large watch. It is flat for a flying tourbillon automatic winder. It's necessarily a little bit broader across the wrist than the 40mm, but not much. If you can wear one, you can wear the other. If you want an extravagant and unmistakable aesthetic that is redolent of the brand that created it, this is the way to go. High mech, high tech, high spec, and of course, high style. Guys, reach out to Tim Mosso at thewatchbox.com for any of these watches, none of which are listed on our website, but I and my team, we have the answers. Thanks so much. Time out, Tim out. Enjoy your day, and thanks for logging on.